Throughout our everyday lives, everybody's preparing for their future. Whether it's getting an education to help better yourself for the future, or exercise in order to make sure you stay healthy for your future, or putting money into a savings account to make sure you'll be better for your retirement. Everybody works towards their future. One part of our futures that we don't think about, though, is the environment, which is possibly the most important part of our future, because without a good environment, we're not going to have a good future. The problem of pollution in our environment is something that affects everybody. I myself spend a lot of time outdoors with the activities that I do. And with that knowledge and the research with the Office of Nuclear Energy, Yale School of the Environment, and the New Atlantis, I've come up with a way to help save our environment. Today I'm going to convince you that the US should adopt more nuclear power plants by discussing the problem of high CO2 emissions into the atmosphere, why it's a problem and what causes it, how we can solve the problem through building more nuclear power plants, and what other people think about it. Now, as I stated, we have a problem with high CO2 emissions rising in the atmosphere. The USGS states that in 2017, 32.5 billion metric tons worth of CO2 were released into the atmosphere. 5.1 billion were from the US. The Office of Nuclear Energy states that this nuclear power plant avoids more than 470 million metric tons of carbon each year, which is the equivalent of removing 100 million cars off the road. Saying that is basically saying if we build more nuclear power plants, about 10% of our CO2 emissions will be canceled. There are many increased risks with continuing with our current energy practices. First off, the US is very dependent on other countries for our energy needs, as we rely a lot on the Middle East for a lot of our oil and coal and natural gas and stuff like that. Both mining and burning fossil fuels creates CO2. Traditional power plants that we have today don't run 24/7, which makes them unreliable. And with all that said, global warming is pretty much a factor in all of this. Now, the cause of CO2 is basically burning fossil fuels. And some examples of fossil fuels are oil, coal, natural gas. It's basically stuff that we mine from the earth. Now, driving cars, burning gasoline, and burning oil, that releases CO2 in the air. Our coal-powered power plants, which are the majority of them are today, releases CO2 into the atmosphere. And much of our industrial and agricultural activities releases CO2 as well. This takes place all over the earth. We're all involved with it. And ranking-wise, China comes in at number one with 10.06 billion metric tons released per year. As I stated before, the US is in second with 5.1, and India is in third with 2.65. Now, why we do it? It's because A, it's efficient to burn. B, because it's convenient for us to get and convenient for us to mine and burn. And C, and probably the biggest reason of all, is because it's cheap. It's cheap to get, cheap to burn, cheap to produce, cheap throughout the board. Richard Rhodes states that nuclear power can be and should be one major component of our rescue from a hotter, more I've tried to pronounce that, I can't, destructive world. Basically saying that nuclear power needs to be in our future in order to help protect our future. Now, my solution of building more nuclear power plants is very reliable for us. These nuclear power plants run 24/7, and the fuels in them last 1.5 to 2 years on average, compared to coal power plants, which I said are a majority of our today, where fuels have to be used every day to every other day. Nuclear power plants also don't release any CO2 into the atmosphere at all. Now, these nuclear power plants run on the same setup as our traditional plants do today, where you have a pool of water and you boil it, the steam rises, turns a turbine, which creates electricity. These nuclear power plants are probably our safest path to a carbon-free future. And many of these nuclear power plants are safer than the plants that are running today. They release less nuclear waste than coal power plants do. These plants are highly regulated, unlike the coal power plants, and today's designs are safer than any plants that have been around in the past or the future. Canada and the World Backgrounder states that nuclear energy is considered as one of the most environmentally friendly sources of energy as it produces fewer greenhouse gas emissions during the production of electricity as compared to traditional sources like coal power plants. Basically stating that it's true that nuclear energy, that it releases less CO2 than anything else. Now, many people may say that it's not really zero carbon, these nuclear power plants, because mining for uranium and building the plants really CO2. Now, that is true, but as far as I'm concerned, we have to mine much less uranium than we have to do coal, oil, and natural gas combined. So there's going to be CO2 released through the mining process either way. And building a power plant's the same thing. There's going to be some CO2 release, but very minimal. And once it's built, there's not going to be any released after that. And much people don't believe that they are safer because of the Chernobyl disaster and Fukushima disaster. Where in Chernobyl's case, it was one of the workers' fault because he wasn't following protocol as he should, which created a nuclear meltdown. In Fukushima, we had the earthquake, which triggered a tsunami, and it's hard to put the blame on somebody because it's not really any single person's fault. It's a bunch of things that went wrong. But most of the designs today are taking into account earthquakes and tsunamis. That way they can make sure they're better for our future. The New Atlantis, a journal of technology and society, states that best available science shows that nuclear energy has always been inherently safe, that our current nuclear reactor designs are the safest and surest path to a carbon neutral future, stating that nuclear energy is probably our safest bet for our future. Now, in review, in today's day and age, we have a problem of high CO2 emissions in the atmosphere. The cause of this problem is the burning of fossil fuels in which we mine from our Earth. And I believe the best way to start solving the problem is to create more nuclear power plants that release no CO2 into the atmosphere. And as many people may say that it's not really safer and it's not really zero carbon, the CO2 released through the processes of mining and burning, building the plants is very minimal to none compared to the coal power plants. And as many people have stated before, the designs we have today are much safer than anything we've had in the past. Now, as in the beginning, I was talking about our future. We need to think more about the environment in our future in order to make sure that our future is going to be environmentally safe. And what I want from everybody here today is to not understand what a nuclear power plant is, but how the nuclear power plant will help us in our future and help us become a carbon free. Thank you.